The wagon lurched violently over another rut in the trail, and Sarah clutched the wooden seat beneath her with white-knuckled hands. Every jolt sent fresh waves of pain through her bruised ribs where Emmett had struck her the night before. She kept her eyes fixed on the endless prairie stretching before them, refusing to look at the man who called himself her husband. 3 months had passed since she arrived in Dakota Territory as a mail-order bride, 3 months since she discovered that the kind letters had been lies, 3 months of learning what cruelty looked like behind closed doors. "You're worthless," Emmett muttered, his breath reeking of whiskey even at mid-morning. "Can't cook worth a damn, can't keep house, can't even give me sons. What good are you?" Sarah said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than words. They were traveling to Fort Pierre for supplies, a 2-day journey across open country. The isolation terrified her more than the bruises. Out here, there was no one to hear her scream, no one to witness what happened when Emmett's temper flared. The horses suddenly spooked, rearing and whinnying with alarm. Emmett cursed and yanked hard on the reins, but something had frightened them badly. Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the tall grass, maybe a snake, maybe something larger. The wagon tilted dangerously as the horses bolted sideways. "Sit down, you stupid woman," Emmett roared as Sarah tried to brace herself. But the wagon was already tipping. Sarah felt herself lifted from the seat, suspended in air for one terrible moment before gravity took hold. She hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the initial impact. Then she was rolling, tumbling down the slight embankment beside the trail. Pain exploded through her body as rocks and hard earth battered her. She heard something crack, her wrist perhaps, or maybe ribs breaking. When she finally stopped rolling, Sarah lay motionless in the dirt, staring up at the impossibly blue sky. She tried to move and gasped at the agony that shot through her left leg. Something was very wrong. She lifted her head slightly and immediately wished she hadn't. Her leg was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Bone gleamed white through torn fabric and skin. "Emmett," she tried to call, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Dust filled her mouth and lungs. She coughed, and the movement sent fresh torment through her broken body. Above her, on the trail, she heard Emmett cursing the horses. The wagon had stopped, but he wasn't calling for her. Minutes passed. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Sarah felt consciousness beginning to slip away. Still, no one came to help her. Then she heard it, the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harnesses. He was leaving. Emmett was actually driving away. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." But the sound of the wagon grew fainter and fainter until silence enveloped her. Sarah lay broken and bleeding under the vast Dakota sky, abandoned like trash beside the trail. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, not from physical pain but from the crushing weight of betrayal. Even now, even after everything, she hadn't believed he would leave her to die. The sun climbed higher. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes aware of the buzzards circling overhead, sometimes lost in fevered dreams of her childhood home in Pennsylvania. She thought of her mother's warnings about going west, about marrying a stranger. She should have listened. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Sarah heard something new, the sound of horses, but different from before. These moved with purpose and rhythm, unshod hooves drumming against the earth. Through the haze of pain and dehydration, she sensed rather than saw figures approaching. Dark shapes blocked out the sun. She tried to speak, to call for help, but only managed a weak moan. Strong hands touched her shoulder, gentle despite their obvious strength. A face appeared above her, weathered and serious, with eyes that held both concern and calculation. The last thing Sarah saw before darkness claimed her was the face of the Lakota Chief who would change everything. Sarah woke to the sound of voices speaking a language she didn't understand. The words flowed like water over stones, soft and rhythmic. She tried to open her eyes, but even that simple action required more strength than she possessed. Her entire body felt heavy, as if someone had replaced her bones with lead. When she finally managed to lift her eyelids, the world swam in and out of focus. She was lying on something soft, buffalo hides, she realized, lead thick beneath her. Above, a domed ceiling made of more hide stretched over bent wooden poles. Sunlight filtered through the smoke hole at the top, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air smelled of sage, smoke, and something medicinal that she couldn't identify. A face appeared in her field of vision, an elderly woman with deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. The woman's expression was stern but not unkind. She placed a cool hand on Sarah's forehead and spoke words that Sarah couldn't comprehend. The woman turned away and called out something, and moments later, another figure entered the lodge. It was the man from the trail, the one whose face she had seen before losing consciousness. He was tall and powerfully built, with long black hair that fell past his shoulders. His face bore the marks of a warrior, a thin scar across one cheekbone, a hawkish nose that had been broken and healed strong. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They held an intelligence and depth that made her think of deep forest pools. He knelt beside her and spoke in halting English. "You are awake. This is good. We thought you might die." "Where?" Sarah's voice cracked, barely audible. Her throat felt like sandpaper. The elderly woman lifted Sarah's head gently and held a cup to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing Sarah had ever tasted. She drank greedily until the woman pulled it away. "You are in my village," the man said. "I am Tohatan, he who runs with the wind. The white men call me Running Wind. The woman helping you is Winona. She is our medicine woman. You were very hurt when we found you." Memories flooded back, the wagon, the fall, Emmett driving away. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. "My husband," she whispered. "He left me." Running Wind's expression hardened. "We saw the wagon tracks. We saw him leave you to die. He is not a man. He is less than a dog." Sarah wanted to argue, to defend Emmett out of some misplaced loyalty, but she couldn't. It was true. He had abandoned her without a second thought. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. Your leg was broken very bad. Winona had to set the bones. You have 2 broken ribs also, and your arm was dislocated. You are lucky to be alive. Sarah tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her leg, so intense that black spots danced in her vision. Winona spoke sharply and placed both hands on Sarah's shoulders, holding her still. The medicine woman turned to Running Wind and said something urgent. "She says you must not move," Running Wind translated. "The bones are healing, but they are not strong yet. If you move too much, they will break again. You must lie still for many more days." "I can't stay here," Sarah said, panic rising in her chest. "I have to. I need to." But she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Go where? Do what? She had no money, no possessions except the torn and blooded dress she'd been wearing. She had nowhere to go and no one to help her. Running Wind seemed to understand her distress. "You will stay here until you are healed. This is decided. You are under my protection now. No one will harm you." Over the following days, Sarah learned to accept help. Winona tended her wounds with poultices made from plants Sarah didn't recognize. The medicine woman changed the splints on Sarah's leg daily, checking the alignment of the bones with practiced hands. Other women from the village brought food, stews made with buffalo meat and prairie turnips, dried berries mixed with fat and honey, herb teas that tasted bitter but eased her pain. Running Wind visited every day. He would sit near the fire and tell her about his people, teaching her words in Lakota. She learned that he was not just a chief but a respected leader who had counted many coups in battle. His wife had died 2 winters ago from the white man's spotted sickness, leaving him to raise their young son alone. "Why did you help me?" Sarah asked one evening as the sun set beyond the lodge walls. "You don't know me. I'm a stranger." Running Wind was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I have seen what happens when we leave the wounded to die. I have seen men turn their backs on honor and become animals. When I saw you lying broken on the ground, I saw a test. Would I be like your husband, caring only for myself? Or would I be a man of honor?" "You chose honor," Sarah said softly. "I chose to see another human being who needed help. The rest was simple." He stood to leave, then paused at the lodge entrance. "Your husband was a fool. He threw away something precious because he was too blind to see its value. His loss will be someone else's gain." 6 weeks had passed since Running Wind found Sarah beside the trail, and the morning sun streamed through the smoke hole as she attempted her first steps. Winona stood close by, ready to catch her if she fell. Sarah's left leg trembled with the effort of bearing weight, the muscles weak from weeks of disuse. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool spring air. "Slow," Winona said in her limited English. "Slow, slow." Sarah took another shuffling step, gripping the lodge pole for support. Pain shot through her leg, but it was different now, the deep ache of healing rather than the sharp agony of fresh injury. She had learned to distinguish between pain that meant danger and pain that meant progress. This was progress. Running Wind entered the lodge carrying an armload of willow branches. He had been crafting something for the past several days, working by the fire in the evenings. When he saw Sarah standing, a rare smile crossed his face. "You are walking. This is very good." "Barely walking," Sarah corrected, but she couldn't help smiling back. I'm as wobbly as a newborn calf. Calves learn to run within hours. You will too, in time. He set down the willow branches and pulled out what he'd been working on, a pair of crutches, carefully carved and smoothed, with padding made from soft deerskin wrapped around the top sections. These will help. The crutches fit perfectly under her arms. With their support, Sarah found she could move with much more confidence. She took several steps around the interior of the lodge, her smile growing wider with each successful movement. For the first time since the accident, she felt a flicker of hope that she might truly recover. Come outside, Running Wind said. The people want to see you. They have been watching this lodge, waiting to know if the white woman will live or die. Show them you are strong. Sarah hesitated. She had been inside the medicine lodge for so long that the outside world seemed distant and strange. What would the villagers think of her? Would they resent the resources spent on an outsider? But Running Wind's expectant expression gave her courage. She nodded. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright. Sarah blinked, her eyes adjusting, and slowly became aware of the village around her. Dozens of teepees stood in a large circle, their painted hides depicting various scenes of hunts and battles. Children played between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked at various tasks, scraping hides, sewing clothing, tending cooking fires. Men sat in groups, some working on weapons, others simply talking. When Sarah emerged on her crutches, activity ceased. All eyes turned toward her. Sarah felt her cheeks flush under the scrutiny. She wanted to retreat back into the safety of the medicine lodge, but Running Wind placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Walk, he said quietly. Show them your strength. Sarah took a deep breath and began moving forward. Each step was difficult, her weak leg protesting the effort, but she kept going. She made it 20 feet before needing to stop and rest. When she looked up, she saw respect in the faces watching her. Several women nodded approvingly. An elderly man called out something, and Running Wind translated. He says you have the heart of a warrior. To survive what you survived and walk again so quickly, this is the mark of strong spirit. Over the following weeks, Sarah's strength grew. She practiced walking every day, gradually increasing the distance she could manage. Winona showed her exercises to rebuild the muscles in her leg, simple movements at first, then more complex ones as healing progressed. The medicine woman also began teaching Sarah other things, how to identify medicinal plants, how to prepare traditional foods, the proper way to tan a hide. Sarah absorbed everything like parched earth drinking rain. She had been raised to be a proper Eastern lady, trained in embroidery and piano, taught to serve tea and make polite conversation. That training seemed useless now. Here, survival meant different skills, practical knowledge that connected directly to staying alive and contributing to the community. The village women gradually accepted her presence. At first, they had been suspicious and distant, but as they saw her determination to heal and learn, their attitudes softened. A young woman named Winyang Waste, which Running Wind translated as beautiful woman, began sitting with Sarah in the evenings, teaching her more Lakota words. Winyang Waste was patient with Sarah's stumbling attempts at pronunciation, laughing good-naturedly when Sarah accidentally said something nonsensical. Running Wind continued to visit daily, though his duties as chief kept him busy. Sarah learned that he spent much of his time mediating disputes, planning hunts, and meeting with the council of elders who advised him. Despite these responsibilities, he always found time to check on her progress. Sometimes he brought his son, a serious boy of about 7 named Tatanka Utiku, charging buffalo, who watched Sarah with curious dark eyes but rarely spoke. One evening, as Sarah sat by the fire working on a pair of moccasins that Winyang Waste had started teaching her to make, Running Wind settled beside her with unusual solemnity. I must tell you something, he said. The army patrol was here today. They were looking for a white woman who disappeared near Fort Pierre. They said her husband reported that she fell from a wagon and died. Sarah's hands stilled on the moccasin. Emmett came back. 3 days after he left you. He told the soldiers you had died and he buried you on the prairie. He seemed very sad, they said. He collected your things from Fort Pierre and left the territory. Rage surged through Sarah's chest. He told them I was dead? He didn't even try to find me? He wanted you to be dead, Running Wind said bluntly. It was easier for him than the truth, that he abandoned his wife to die alone. What did you tell the soldiers? Running Wind's expression remained neutral. I told them we had seen no white woman. It was not a lie. The woman we found was nearly dead. The woman who sits here now is someone new, someone stronger. That broken woman on the trail, she is gone. You are someone different now. Summer arrived with fierce heat that baked the prairie and sent shimmering waves dancing above the grass. Sarah stood outside Running Wind's teepee, watching children splash in the nearby creek. Her leg had healed remarkably well, though it still ached when rain approached. She no longer needed the crutches, and had learned to hide her limp through careful steps and strong will. The scar on her leg remained, a pale twisted line that ran from knee to ankle, but it had become just another part of her story. 3 months in the village had transformed her in ways she never imagined possible. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now weathered and strong from daily work. Her skin had darkened from hours in the sun, and she had adopted the practical clothing of Lakota women, soft doeskin dresses that allowed free movement, moccasins that made no sound on the earth. She wore her brown hair in 2 long braids the way Winyang Waste had taught her. When she caught her reflection in the creek, she barely recognized herself. But the changes went deeper than appearance. Sarah had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. She could butcher a deer, tan a hide, set up a teepee, gather medicinal plants, and prepare traditional foods. She understood the rhythm of village life, the communal nature of survival where everyone contributed according to their abilities. This was so different from her life in Pennsylvania, where success meant marrying well and managing a household with proper decorum. "You are thinking too much again," Running Wind said, appearing beside her so quietly she jumped. He had a gift for moving silently despite his size. "I can always tell. Your forehead gets these lines." He gestured to his own forehead, mimicking a frown. "I was thinking about how much has changed," Sarah admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm the same person who arrived in Dakota Territory as Emmett's mail-order bride." "You are not," Running Wind said simply. "That woman was broken by cruelty and thrown away. You are the woman who survived and became strong. This is who you were always meant to be." His words stirred something deep in Sarah's chest. Over the months, her feelings toward Running Wind had evolved from gratitude to friendship to something more complex that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. He had been unfailingly kind without ever being condescending. He treated her as an equal, asking her opinions and listening to her ideas. When she made mistakes, he corrected her gently. When she succeeded, he praised her honestly. "There is something I must discuss with you," Running Wind said, his tone becoming serious. "The council met last night. They are concerned about your presence here." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "They want me to leave." "No, not that. They are concerned about your status. You are neither white nor Lakota. You are not a captive, but you are not truly one of us. This creates confusion. Some of the young men have asked if they might court you, but the elders say this cannot happen until your place in the tribe is clear." "I don't understand. What are you saying?" Running Wind looked out across the prairie, choosing his words carefully. "In our way, there are several possibilities. You could be formally adopted into the tribe, given a Lakota name and made a daughter of one of the respected women. This would make you one of us, with all rights and responsibilities. Or..." He paused, and Sarah saw uncertainty cross his face for the first time since she'd known him. "Or you could marry into the tribe. A marriage would settle the question of your status permanently." Sarah's heart began to race. "Is that what you want? For me to marry someone?" "I want you to be free to choose your own path," Running Wind said. "But I will be honest with you, Sarah Hartley. If you chose to marry, I would ask you to consider me." The declaration hung in the air between them. Sarah stared at him, searching his face for signs that she had misunderstood. But his expression was open and sincere, without any trace of jest or manipulation. "You want to marry me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I have watched you transform from a broken woman into someone strong and capable. I have seen your determination, your courage, your kindness. You are patient with my son, who does not easily accept new people. You work hard without complaint. You laugh easily and think deeply. These are qualities I value." He turned to face her fully. "But more than this, when I am with you, the grief that has lived in my chest since my wife died becomes lighter. You make me remember what happiness feels like. I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. A few months ago, she had been trapped in a marriage to a man who saw her as property, who hurt her and finally threw her away like garbage. Now a man who epitomized honor and strength was asking her to be his partner. The contrast was almost too much to process. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Emmett never asked me to marry him, he bought me like livestock through a catalog. He never cared what I wanted or how I felt. You're asking for my choice, and I don't even know how to think about that." "Then don't answer now," Running Wind said. "Take time. Consider what you want for your future. I will respect whatever you decide. Over the following days, Sarah wrestled with the question. She sought counsel from Winona, who told her that Running Wind was a good man who would never raise his hand in anger. She talked with Winyang Waste, who giggled and said that all the unmarried women in the village were jealous that Running Wind had shown interest in Sarah. She even spoke with some of the elder women, who evaluated her with sharp eyes and pronounced her worthy of a chief's attention. But the most important conversation happened with Charging Buffalo. The boy had remained distant despite Sarah's many attempts to befriend him. He was loyal to the memory of his mother and saw Sarah as an intruder. One afternoon, Sarah found him sitting alone by the creek, throwing stones into the water with angry force. "May I sit with you?" she asked in Lakota. Charging Buffalo shrugged but didn't tell her to leave. Sarah settled onto the grass beside him, saying nothing, just watching the water flow past. After a long silence, the boy spoke. "My father wants to marry you. He has asked me to consider it," Sarah confirmed. "But I won't do anything that would hurt you. You've already lost your mother. I won't try to replace her." "No one can replace her," Charging Buffalo said fiercely. "She was the best. I believe you. And I'm not asking to take her place in your heart. That place belongs to her forever." Sarah picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in her hands. "But maybe there could be room for something new. Not replacing what was, but adding something different." Charging Buffalo threw another stone, watching it skip across the water. "Father has been sad for a long time. Lately, he smiles more. The other warriors notice. They say he is becoming himself again. Do you mind that?" Sarah asked gently. The boy was quiet for a long moment. "I miss seeing him happy," he finally admitted. "And you are not cruel. You work hard. You are learning our ways. You don't pretend to be Lakota, but you try to understand us. This shows respect." It wasn't enthusiastic approval, but it wasn't rejection either. Sarah took it as the gift it was, a young boy's grudging acceptance that change could happen without destroying what came before. That evening, Sarah found Running Wind and gave him her answer. The wedding ceremony was nothing like what Sarah had imagined as a girl reading romance novels in Pennsylvania. There was no church, no white dress, no gathered crowd of well-wishers in their finest clothes. Instead, the celebration was held in the center of the village at sunset, with the entire tribe forming a circle around Sarah and Running Wind. The elders stood as witnesses, and Winona performed the traditional blessing, speaking words in Lakota that Sarah now understood well enough to recognize their power and meaning. Sarah wore a dress that had taken Winyang Waste and several other women 2 weeks to complete. It was made from the softest doeskin, dyed pale cream and decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that told a story: a woman falling, a woman rising, a woman standing strong beside a warrior. The symbolism was clear to everyone who looked at it. This was not just a marriage but a transformation, a journey from destruction to redemption. Running Wind stood tall beside her, wearing his ceremonial clothing adorned with eagle feathers earned through acts of courage and leadership. His face was painted with careful designs that marked this as a sacred occasion. When he took Sarah's hand, his grip was warm and steady, without any of the possessive cruelty she had learned to fear in Emmett's touch. The ceremony concluded with an exchange of gifts. Running Wind presented Sarah with a beautifully crafted knife in a beaded sheath, its blade sharp and perfectly balanced. "So you will always be able to protect yourself," he said. "So you will never be helpless again." Sarah's gift to him had been more difficult to create. With Winona's help, she had tanned a hide and painted it with a scene she had sketched many times before getting it right. It showed a warrior on horseback finding a fallen woman beside a trail, and in the distance, the sun rising over the prairie. Under the painted scene, Sarah had painstakingly worked the Lakota words that translated to, "In darkest night, honor shines brightest." When Running Wind saw it, his usually stoic expression crumbled. He pulled Sarah into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground, and she heard him whisper against her hair in English, "I will honor this gift every day of my life by honoring you." The celebration that followed lasted long into the night. There was feasting, buffalo meat roasted over fires, stews rich with prairie vegetables, dried berries and pemmican passed around in wooden bowls. There was dancing, the rhythmic drumbeat echoing across the prairie while men and women moved in traditional patterns that had been performed for generations. There was singing, voices rising together in harmonies that made Sarah's throat tight with emotion. Charging Buffalo sat beside Sarah for much of the evening, his small hand occasionally reaching out to touch her arm as if confirming she was real. At one point, he leaned close and whispered, "Mother is watching from the spirit world. I think she is happy that father found you." Sarah had to blink back tears. She squeezed the boy's hand gently. "I hope she knows I will do my best to honor her memory and care for both of you." As the celebration wound down and people began retiring to their teepees, Running Wind led Sarah to the lodge they would now share. It had been enlarged and reorganized to accommodate a family rather than a lone man and his son. Sarah's few possessions, the moccasins she had made, the medicine bag Winona had given her, the small treasure she had collected during her recovery, had been arranged carefully on a special shelf. That night, as Sarah lay beside Running Wind listening to his steady breathing and the sounds of the prairie outside, she thought about the strange path that had brought her here. She had come west as a mail-order bride full of naive hopes about building a new life. Those hopes had been crushed by a cruel man who saw her as less than human. She had been broken and discarded, left to die alone under an uncaring sky. But that tragedy had become the door to something she never could have imagined. She had been found by people who valued honor over greed, community over individualism, strength of spirit over material wealth. She had discovered capabilities within herself that proper society would never have allowed her to develop. She had learned what it meant to truly contribute to something larger than herself. And she had found Running Wind, a man who had shown her that partnership could mean equality, that marriage could mean mutual respect, that love could grow from friendship and shared values rather than ownership and control. Emmett had tried to destroy her, but in failing to kill her body, he had killed only the weak, confined person she had been forced to be. The woman who survived was someone new, someone stronger. Sarah understood now that she had been given an extraordinary gift, the chance to rebuild herself from the ground up, to choose who she wanted to become rather than accepting the limited role society had assigned her. Not every woman who was broken would get such an opportunity. Many would die from injuries like hers. Many would be found by people less honorable than Running Wind. Many would never find the strength to adapt to a completely different way of life. The path ahead would not be easy. Sarah knew that tensions between the Lakota and white settlers were increasing. She had heard the worried discussions among the elders about broken treaties and shrinking hunting grounds. The world was changing in ways that threatened this way of life. There would be challenges, conflicts, perhaps even tragedy. But tonight, Sarah chose to focus on what she had rather than what she feared losing. She had a husband who respected her, a son who was learning to accept her, a community that had welcomed her despite every reason to turn her away. She had skills and purpose and the kind of deep belonging she had never experienced in her old life. Running Wind stirred beside her, his arm pulling her closer even in sleep. Sarah nestled against him, feeling safe in a way she had never felt with Emmett. This was what marriage was supposed to be, two people choosing each other, supporting each other, building something together. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Sarah whispered a prayer of thanksgiving to whatever forces had conspired to bring her to this moment. She had been thrown from a wagon and shattered on the prairie, left for dead by a man who couldn't see her value. But a Lakota chief had found her, had seen past her broken body to the unbroken spirit within, and had given her the space to heal and transform. She was Sarah Running Wind now, and though the future remained uncertain, she faced it without fear. She had already survived the worst thing she could imagine. Everything else was just living, and she intended to live fully, courageously, and without regret. The woman who had been thrown away had become the woman who chose to stay. And that made all the difference.